Welcome to Plant Amnesty's rose pruning class. My name is Keith, and I'll be guiding you through the ins and outs of rose pruning. But first, Plant Amnesty would like to thank the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, Urban and Community Forestry Division, and the USDA Forest Service for their help with this series of classes. We're going to talk about rose pruning today. There are many types of roses, and it helps to know what type of rose you have in your yard as to what type of pruning you're going to be doing. Some of the roses, like hybrid teas, grandifloras, and floribundas, require much more pruning than, say, shrub roses, miniatures, or musk roses. Hybrid teas are the very familiar rose most people have in their gardens, or maybe your mother had in her garden. They are the large flower heads on top of a single stem. These flowers require regular pruning in the spring to ensure most production of their flowers. The grandifloras and floribundas have large blooms on single stems and are quite showy. All of these roses require that spring pruning. The landscape rose, or shrub rose as they're sometimes known, is a whole nother type of rose. It is smaller, usually in stem and leaf. The blooms are smaller. They can be single blossoms. They can be doubles. They come in a variety of colors. Some are fragrant, some are not. They are usually very hardy and drought tolerant. The foliage can be very glossy, which usually points to disease resistance, which is very important in roses. The climbing roses are a whole nother animal. They are climbers, and that's what they do. Here's a climber on an arbor down in Oregon. This has obviously been very well maintained. You may have a climber at your house, but it may be eating your garage and running up the roof. Here's a climbing rose that was planted next to a fence. Unfortunately, it was planted under large trees. You can notice that there are not many leaves left on the plant due to disease, probably black spot. All the leaves have fallen off. But technically, it did bloom, so I guess it's a success, but not a very good one. So if this rose was planted in a full sun situation, it would be much happier. So here's a tree that I was walking by one day, and I was trying to figure out what type of tree this was. I was looking at the foliage and just couldn't quite get it. So as I looked up into the tree and tried to figure this out, I saw two different types of leaves. Looking down at the trunk, I realized that there was a climbing rose running up the tree, and it had completely engulfed the top of the tree. It must be beautiful when it blooms, but it just totally swallowed up the tree. This shows you that these climbers, some of these climbers anyway, can get quite massive. And it's unrealistic to grow that climbing rose on that little tiny plastic trellis that they sell you at the nursery with your climbing rose. So speaking of trees, just to take you on a little side trip here, Plant Amnesty wants you to know that you should never top or head back your trees. What this does is it can create an unhealthy, ugly, or a dead tree. Not something you want to do. If you think your tree is in danger to you or your house, you should get a risk assessment from an ISA-certified arborist. And if you would like more information on pruning trees or dealing with trees, you should go to plantamnesty.org. We're going to talk about how to grow healthy roses. Growing a healthy rose gives you something very nice to look at and something to prune, and that's what we're talking about today is pruning roses. So if you don't have a good-looking rose and it's just wilting, there's nothing to prune. I can't help you. So I want to help you grow a healthy rose. The two main important parts of growing a healthy rose is location, lots and lots of sun. The rose needs plenty of sun, so put it out there where it can get sun as much during the day as possible. The second part is disease resistance. If you choose a rose that has good disease resistance, you'll have a much happier rose, less problems, and you'll be much happier as well. When you are choosing a disease-resistant rose, at your favorite nursery, let's say, they usually have a sheet that lists the different categories, such as flower color, fragrance, height, etc. Disease resistance should also be on there. That's the first thing I look at. I go with disease resistance, and then I look at fragrance, and then I look at color. But if you don't have a good disease-resistant variety, you will always have troubles. You'll always be dealing with black spot, powdery mildew, and so on. So choose a good disease-resistant variety for your area. A good healthy rose will produce strong, new canes. These are where the flowers come from. You want a rose that continues to put out nice glossy leaves and good canes, and then you'll get good flower production. These are good, healthy leaves. This is what your leaves should look like. This rose is in a good sunny spot. It's a disease-resistant variety. It's very happy. This rose is not happy. This may look like the roses in your yard. I hope not, but it's possible. We all have roses like this. This was probably not a good variety to begin with and was not planted in a good place. It is barely living, and it might bloom this year, but it might not. I would replace this rose with a good disease-resistant variety. Sometimes your yard is not a great place for roses. There's not enough sun. Maybe your neighbor has a good sunny yard. You should talk to your neighbor about putting in some roses. Then you can go over there and smell their roses. This poor rose never had a chance. This rose was planted in between two houses in the deep shade, and it was under an overhang of the roof. It never even got any rain. So this rose didn't have a chance, shouldn't be there. You might want to replace it with a rock or something that's not living. When deciding what type of rose you want to put in your yard, there are other choices besides your local nursery. Hopefully you live in an area that there is a public rose garden that you can go check out what roses are there and what roses do well in your area. Luckily, in the Seattle area, we have our Woodland Park Zoo Rose Garden. It's called that because it's next to our zoo. As you walk in, you take a list of the roses and a map to where the roses are and stroll into the garden. There are over 150 varieties laid out in the sun, and they are all, of course, they're blooming their heads off during the season, but you can go there in the winter and take a look at what they look like in the winter. You can also visit them in March while the gardeners are pruning them to see how they do it. This is a great place to walk around, look at rose varieties, smell the roses, and figure out what type of roses you want to put in your yard. All the roses have a sign that name the rose and tell you what type of rose it is. This one's a hybrid tea, so then you know it's going to be a large flower. It's great to go during the season when the roses are blooming so that you can smell them, you can feel the leaves, you can judge how well that rose does. This particular rose garden has been conducting an experiment for over 6 or 7 years. In place of fungicides, they have been applying compost tea to the roses in an effort to get away from the dangerous pesticides. What they do is they replace older, diseased roses with hardier varieties. So those roses that just can't take it get pulled out and they put in new varieties. So as you stroll through the gardens, you see how well these roses do in your area because they're essentially growing in your area. When you decide what roses you want or you would like to have, then you take that list to your local nursery and see once if they have it. And these days you go on the internet and you can order those types of roses, but you've got a sense of what roses do very well in your area. Again, location is very important. You've got to plant your roses in plenty of sun or they won't do as well. Going back to the garden, all of their roses are out in the full sun. There are trees on the property, but there's no roses underneath them. What types of plants are there? Hostas, hellebores, ferns, sarcoca, all shade-loving plants, not a rose to be seen. I think they're onto something. If you plant your rose in a place where it doesn't get much sun, you're going to have more disease problems like this powdery mildew and black spot and everything else that's going to follow. You want leaves that look like this, glossy, healthy, a very happy rose. So, again, first of all, choose a disease-resistant variety and then put it in the best location possible. Roses can be transplanted. If you find a better spot for your rose that's going to get more sun and be much happier, then by all means, move it. Dig up that rose, hopefully during the winter season when it's dormant, and place it in its new area. Feed it, mulch it, and stand back. It should do a whole lot better.